Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today you join me with two kriss vectors. As you guys might have already seen on the channel, I reviewed the KWA kriss vector a little while back. I recently got the krytac kriss vector. A few people have been asking for this, a direct comparison between the two. And there's going to be some work done on this in the coming weeks. So I've actually already started some of it. So I wanted to do the review before I went too far with it, where these are, too far apart to actually be any kind of decent review. I've got you on a slightly more zoomed out platform here, so hopefully the video quality is okay. But that's so we can try and get all of these in to be able to see the whole thing. So straight away, we have the KWA and the krytac here. Main differences we have initially is the KWA is what we call the sort of Gen 1, which has a squared off end on the front here with a torch fitting in here. Also has the sliding trigger, which if I remove the magazine, has a little bit of a take up here and then really quite heavy, and then it comes to the back, pull to release. You can see my one has the safety delete. Actually came with this, but to be fair, I actually prefer this because the safety on the KWA is very long travel. So personally, I think it's better this way. You can see my one's wearing a Trigicon MRO, mainly because I got this boneyard without the sights. I don't actually like the Gen 1 sights anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. It's wearing a standard 16mm thread protector, not actually the one it came with, but this one has I forget the brand, but it is a steel outer barrel, which was a really, really rare thing that was fitted to these sometimes. It's an aftermarket part. But internally, it's all stock. So external differences then. You can see on here we have this slot on the top here, which is coupled with the torch fitting. So basically the idea is you can fit the torch in here, cable comes through here, and it can mount to one of these side pieces for you to be able to activate the torch with a button. On the actual side of it, the controls are all in the same place. We have our standard bolt release, mag release, selector switches, and then as I said, we've got our safeties back here, but mine have been deleted from this one. If we check the krytac here, you can see same kind of situation. You can see the different angled front on this one compared to the KWA. You can see a lot steeper angle on this one compared to the KWA. Again, I believe you can buy the torch fitment to go in here, but you don't have the slots in the top here to be able to run the cable out. Barrel wise, this is actually wearing a Bowmaster steel outer barrel as well, which again is one of those upgrades I did to this. This one also is running the Bowmaster steel charging handle and the Bowmaster steel bracket, which holds the slide release, or the bolt release, should I say. Also coupled with a slightly stronger spring, which is definitely stronger than the one we have on the KWA. You can see differences between the two of these immediately. We have side rails on this one and a hand stop. These are just extras, so just disregard these. The stock krytac has an aluminium or alloy charging handle, very much the same as what you get with a KWA. They still work in exactly the same fashion. The other thing with KWA pot metal, which is what all this is on this, it's quite heavy, so you do add a lot of bulk with the alloy charging handle, which the krytac is definitely a lot lighter. Switches are all the same between the two. You can see though, the KWA has a flush fitting type screw, whereas the krytac has like a button head screw, which I believe both are how they should be for the real steel, because again, we're talking Gen 1, Gen 2 here. Rails on the top are the same. Lower rail is the same. You can see differences between the handguards here. This has a few ribs on the front and then none at the top here, whereas the krytac, the Gen 2, has ribs all the way up the front here. Both have the fencing around the magazine catches. However, the KWA, it's quite recessed in. Because if you look at the krytac, it's level with the sort of fencing around the outside. We have our serial numbers on the side here. The KWA has the KWA manufactured in Taiwan logo here. Then also here has your serial number and HK after it. From my understanding, the HK determines whereabouts it was made. This, I believe, to be a KSC. But it's essentially a KWA because it was marketed and sold by KWA. But they did, the KSC ones were available as well, and they were all Hong Kong made. You can see on the krytac we have a serial number, which apparently is legit. And down here it says krytac, officially licensed product. Triggers, you can see it is a sliding trigger on the Gen 1, whereas on the Gen 2 we have a pivoting trigger, and it's a different design as well. The safety catch as well is just a 45-degree safety, which is quite nice. Compared to on the Gen 1, it is a almost 180-degree. Pistol grips, essentially the same. If we look between the two, you can see they're basically the same. We have this sort of raised pattern here, which in the KWA, it's actually recessed slightly. There are more ribs on the krytac, front and rear, whereas on the KWA, it's just a few ribs on the front and no ribs on the rear. You have the cap at the bottom here as well, as you do with the krytac. This one has the Vector logo in there as well. Main differences are rearward. If we look at the stocks, you can see the stocks are quite different. This being the Gen 1, this being the Gen 2. You can see the buttons are different. We've got a round button to release this one and a square on this one. You also have sling loop at the bottom here. The rear pads are adjustable for pull as well, so you can adjust these out. But you can see this one slightly shorter than the Gen 2 and also has a sling loop at the bottom, which has obviously been defunct for this now. Now, as far as I'm aware, on the krytacs, they actually use a real steel stock. So this is the same as the real steel, and it is of the same materials. They didn't change anything, they just literally got them off real steel ones. So you got a real steel stock on this. Whereas on the KWA, it is plastic. And it's worth talking about materials now. Externally, the KWA is all plastic. It is not of any kind of polymer. It is straight KSC KWA plastic, which is fine. It holds up reasonably well, but they are prone to cracking. I've had a few crack. And also the main failure point on these is the hinge at the back here and here. So basically all that would happen is if you were to fall on it mid-skirmish, which I've seen, a few after effects of, they either break out of here, where this rips it out because this is a metal button with a big latch on it, or they crack across here and break the hinge off. On the krytac, we've got a similar situation. Obviously a big button and a big latch. This is plastic though, or polymer. And again on here, it could break out of there, but slightly different design on here. The main thing to consider with this though, is the krytac is a polymer, not just plastic. So it is some kind of glass reinforced, I would say plastic, GRP, but potentially also it has a feel of nylon as well. So whether it is ballistics based, I don't know. But it certainly gives you the impression of being much higher quality than the KWA is. Dimensions wise, the KWA definitely feels a little bit thicker than the Gen 2. If we look from the top, you can't really tell with the sight there. They look pretty much the same inside. You can see the mag wells look very, very similar. But definitely the KWA feels like it has more bulk. And it could be the case, they are slightly more bulky, but it's worth bearing in mind that the krytac version is based upon the 9mm variant, whereas as you can see from the markings on the KWA, it is 45 ACP. So this would be a slightly larger weapon if we were talking real steel here. Other than that, externally, that's pretty much it. They are both reminiscent of the correct vector, unlike some of the AEGs which have the selector down here. Only thing to bear in mind that is different between the two is that the flash hiders, the barrel on the KWA is a 16mm thread, positive, whereas on the krytac they are 14mm negative. So much better for using your standard style suppressors and stuff like that on. So that's externally. So let's have a look internally and see the differences between the two there. So internally then, first of all, well, let's look at the uppers. So on the KWA, we have here, and the krytac we have here. So slightly more zoomed in look now so you can get a better idea of what we're looking at internally. So on the uppers, we have the krytac on the bottom, KWA at the top. And you can see actually looking inside here, there's not a lot of difference in it. You can see we have our case deflectors, which obviously are not functional in Airsoft. You can see on the front we have this part which drops down and around the outer barrel, which you don't have on the KWA. Internally, if we look between the two fire control groups, they look very, very similar. And I believe krytac did base it around the KWA. The hammers look very, very similar. Apart from the KWA one is a lot thinner, whereas the krytac's a lot thicker. The krytac also has a little nub poking out to support the spring, whereas the KWA has a little pin which pokes out. The auto sears are both in similar positions, and you can see the burst wheels as well in the same position as well. We can also see you've got this long spring protruding out inside both of these in the same position. This is your spring for your trigger, and you can see what that's doing there to sort of give it some tension. Now, the main difference between the two of these, I don't know whether parts are interchangeable. I don't want to take these apart because the KWA is complicated enough. No idea on the krytac. It looks to be a very similar system. I don't need to be taking these apart and checking to see if the parts are interchangeable. If someone wants me to do that at a later stage, I might consider it, but at the moment I don't need to mess around with it, so I'm not going to. But one of the main differences I've noticed is on the KWA, the actual fire control group housing is alloy, whereas on the krytac it is polymer. So, and I know that some of the KWA boys did mess around with 3D printed fire control group housings to great success. So I would assume that they've gone down that route because it's been proven that they don't need the extra bulk that the KWA has. But other than that, internally, they're very similar. It's the same setup. How it seems to operate appears to be the same. And from what I've seen of the fire control group, it has the same sort of 3 plungers in the top with springs, whereas the KWA has them separate, whereas the krytac, they're held in captive with grub screws. How you remove the fire control group on both of these, I believe is the same process. You literally just have to undo your selectors and your safeties, punch the pin out on the top of the top rail. On the KWA, you have to undo these 2 screws. You don't need to on the krytac, they don't have those. The rail then slides off, and then you've got 3 screws at the top on both of these. Undo the 3 screws. Undo the 2 screws for the brass deflector. Same on both ones. And then the whole fire control group can slide forwards and out. And that's essentially your upper receiver. This is where we see differences. So we're going into looking at the lower receiver now. Now, if we flip these both up so you can see them side by side, they do look quite different. Try and stand these up together so you can see. Now you can see the KWA has a sort of similar length barrel, slightly longer though, but not crazy long. Charging handles in the same place and operate in a very similar fashion. You can see you've got this extension here with a spring, same on this one. The krytac has a screw to hold the spring in place. This one has just a little nub that pokes out. You can see the main pin goes through this top section here. On the KWA, the barrel is held in with a single screw, whereas on the krytac, there's a plate with 2 screws. The main difference between the two of these, though, is inside here. You can see you've got this big lug on the top of the krytac, which you do not have on the KWA. And that is because this has the TDC hop, or what we've called the top dead center hop. So yeah, quite different in that case. To adjust the hop unit, the hop rubber and hop contact patch, you can literally just turn this, or you can get a Allen key through the top. The KWA, you need a tool to do it that goes into the breech to rotate it round. A bit further back, if we look at the bolt carrier, you can see the bolt carrier is different. The bolt carrier itself is longer on the KWA than it is on the krytac. Also, the KWA, and I'll show you this when I take the internals out, has two little ears that poke out that the krytac does not have. Pins are all, though, in a similar position. So let's get the internals out so you can see the differences between the two. So here we have the internals then. You can see on the left here, we have the krytac. On the right, we have our KWA. Now straight away, you can see some quite large differences between the two. Things I want to quickly point out is there are two non-standard parts on these that you can see, and they're pretty obvious. First of all, we've got this long buffer, shorter buffer on the krytac. This is a 3D printed part. I forget where it came from now, but basically this enables you to have longer travel. I think it's a black variable part. I could be wrong, but that gives slightly longer travel, which they do have problems with it being short stroked. It does give issues. So the initial trick was to cut the original one down. I've just fitted a 3D printed part, which just enables slightly longer travel, which helps the consistency. On the KWA, you can see the other non-standard part here is I've got a spacer here, which is to increase spring tension. Realistically, this doesn't do anything for efficiency. The rate of fire, in my opinion, on the KWA is a bit too slow. So I initially short stroked this, which did help, but actually the increased spring tension makes a bigger difference, and you can still get lock back, which is nice. But you can see major differences between the two of these. The KWA has this extra lug on the front here. Now what this is for your valve locking system. On the krytac, we have a standard valve locker. You can see this little pin poking up here, which basically as the bolt comes forward, it pushes that down. So if I put the hammer, which is the striker, if you like, forwards, when I press down on this, the hammer comes back. Where in the KWA, we don't have the valve locker. If we push the hammer forwards, you can see there's an extra little bar poking out the bottom here. By activating that, we'll then reset the striker. And that's what this extra lug is for. That's why you don't have it on the KWA, on the krytac, because it doesn't need it because it's a different system, which, to be fair, is probably a bit more along the lines of what we'd normally expect. So that's the carriers. You can see there's a slight difference between the carriers as well. The KWA has the groove in it. This mimics the real steel. The krytac does not have that because the bolt design is different. I'm going to take the bolt out of the KWA carrier and you can see the difference between the two. So here we can see difference between the two bolts. The KWA one is considerably longer. However, there isn't any extra volume involved here. This is just this system on the back here. If we flip these down so you can see them both. Okay, the little wheel has come off on this one, but you can see the difference. It doesn't have these two ears on here. And the reason why it doesn't have these is because this system just rides against these two parts, whereas this one rides internally. And I'll show you when I get these back together how they operate, which is one of the other main differences between the two. Nozzle-wise, we have a cup type on the back of this. This is the KWA. These always go hard and brittle, and it's not a very good system. The problem with the KWAs now as well is you can't get these nozzles. This is a stock factory nozzle. This gun's had very little use and is pretty much brand new internally. But you can see it sort of slides nicely in and out, no problem. How to remove the nozzle is different as well. You have to punch two little roll pins out and these slide pins come out. And then you can punch the pin out the back here to then release the back part of the nozzle seal. And then you can retract the nozzle. On the krytac, it's different. You have two screws either side, which you undo. and then there's a E-clip on the back here. This one has got an upgrade part already fitted to it, so disregard that, but it is normally the same cup type. That is not a very good system, and I've had various issues with consistency using that, but since I've changed over to this part, which I think is the Hephaestus part, it's loads better. Nozzles, as far as I'm aware, are not interchangeable between the two either. You can see the gasket hole for the receiver is different as well. So that's that for now. We're now going to put them back together and I can show you how they operate and the differences there. Now we're going to see how these systems operate. Okay, so if we flip these up, we're now going to show you how these are different and how they work. So the KWA, which is the original system, if we look, if I charge the bolt, pulling the charging handle back does what they call a press check in real steel, which is just retracts the bolt slightly so you can see if there's a case in the chamber. Obviously that does nothing for Airsoft. As we go to pull the charging handle back, you can see what's happening here with the bolt. You notice it's dipping down into the receiver, and this is how the real steel works. It deflects the energy downwards to try and control recoil. If you've ever seen one working on YouTube, the real steel ones, by the way, you'll see that it doesn't really do a good job of that. But either way, it's an interesting system. But that's how this one functions. If we look at the krytac, notice we do still at the same press check, and as you retract the bolt to the rear, notice the bolt just goes straight back. It does not dip down. And that is for a few reasons, I believe. First of all, there is quite well documented problems between kriss and KWA. I'm not going to go into it on here, but you can look it up if you want. There's quite a few issues that they have between the two companies, and basically, from my understanding, krytac were not going to be able to directly copy the design made by KWA. Nor would they probably want to be fair, because it's a very gas-hungry system. So, because you've got to think, it is retracting the bolt down and also pulling it down out of the way as well. It's just extra friction. And everything has to be timed correctly and tight toleranced. Whereas this system, with it just coming straight back, means that effectively what you've got is it just moving in one motion. It means that short stroking is a lot more effective. And actually these are short stroked out of the factory anyway. If we look at how far the KWA comes back, comes quite far back, and these are actually slightly short stroked anyway. Whereas in the krytac, it doesn't come back half as much, but it does come back sort of similar around now. Now it has the cut down buffer. Usually it comes back to about here, but there's extra travel involved now because of that slightly different part here. So yeah, two quite different systems on how they work. Which one's better? I think that's a matter of opinion. If you want something that looks and works like the real steel, then really the KWA is the only way to go. And notice it is nice and smooth. And there's very little lube in this. You've seen this is covered in, this is graphite powder to try and help it work. It does work reasonably well, but if I go slowly, notice it gets stuck and hangs up slightly. That's probably a lot to do with this system. It's pushing upwards on a part which is trying to go this way. So it's actually forcing the rollers into the frame, which in my opinion is not a great way to do it. I understand why they did it this way, and I think it is a good idea. But there has to be, really, they should have made these side plates from steel, I think, because at the moment what's happening is it's just deforming them, and that's where we're getting a lot of wear and then inconsistencies in the design. So that's my opinion, of course, anyway. So yeah, there's the two different systems and how they operate. You can see differences between the bolt by looking through the top here. You can see what I mean about the differences between the two. Also, we've got a hole in the top of the KWA. Other than that, though, essentially it's the same type of system. None of these parts as well are interchangeable between the two. So if you think you'd like to try and build yourself a krytac inside a KWA body or vice versa. There are kits available to convert the KWA to fit inside the AEG krytac shell, which is actually the same as the GBB shell anyway. I know because I've got an AEG shell that I intended to use for this, and I checked it recently and it is exactly the same. But changing the parts inside here into the KWA, I wouldn't see why you would do that, because the body's not as good quality as the krytac anyway, so it makes no sense. Other than that, there aren't really any interchangeable parts in here that I can see that would function, other than maybe the body pins. Charging handles potentially could be the same or could be utilised, but other than that, I don't think there's a lot else there you could use. As you can see, we've put these back together now. So really, now it's time to talk about which one do I prefer. It's a difficult question, because the KWA has been around for so long now and been so appreciated by its fans that it's sort of a piece of history, really. But in reality, using one on gas, it's not great. There are some, it's an old system now. So realistically, to get the best out of it, you really need to run it on HPA. You can use gas mags and they do work. Accuracy is okay. But obviously proprietary hot rubbers and barrels mean that you haven't got a lot to upgrade. And internally, there isn't a lot to upgrade anyway. The internals are steel. There are some upgrades available. This is wearing a couple of them. But other than that, that's about it. The krytac being a new platform, there are loads of parts coming out for it. Whether or not it's going to be around for long, who knows? Whether or not these parts will be around for long, who knows? But I think in reality, I like having them both. Because obviously if they're exactly the same, then there wouldn't be a lot in it. But because this is a Gen 1, this is a Gen 2, it's nice to have them both. Personally, for mucking around with, I think the krytac is a better option. It's lighter than the KWA. We've got more upgrade capability with this as well. And just how it feels, it feels a lot more like the plastics, and the externals feel a lot more real steel. Whereas the KWA definitely has that kind of plastic feel, whereas the krytac does not. Not to say that I don't like the KWA, because I do. As I say, I've had a few of these over the years, and I must say I'm a big fan of what they managed to do here. The fact they're able to fully replicate the bolt coming down inside is fantastic, and it's one of the things I love about it the most. Obviously the krytac does not have that, and therefore usually that would be something that I'm not so interested in, because it doesn't replicate the real steel. But I think in reality, to make it work as an airsoft gun for something that you can mess around with or take skirmishing, this is really where it's at. To skirmish one of those would be difficult. Not only because mag weight. krytac mag here, KWA mag here, there is a hell of a lot of difference between the two. I should get my scales out and weigh them, but yeah, it's a huge difference. I would say you'd need 4 or 5 of these to get to the same weight of this one KWA mag. It is ludicrously heavy. So to carry, 4 or 5 of those on your person, it would be difficult. I have heard that you can use the krytac magazines in the KWA though, so that would potentially be another way around it. How efficient it is, I don't know. It's something that we'll definitely look at a later stage. The journey is going to be with this one, that we're going to be upgrading it and showing you guys what I do to it to try and improve the system. We're going to call it there. Thanks for tuning in and going through this journey of seeing the difference between the two. If you have any questions, feel free to fire away in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.